Hello everybody. The French Revolution, spanning from 1789 to 1799, became a fundamental pillar for the development of democracy in Europe. This pivotal decade witnessed the birth of ideas and practices that shaped modern representative government, setting the stage for the democratic values we cherish today. The government in France before the Revolution was known as the Ancien Regime. This regime was led by King Louis XVI, who maintained his power with the support of the clergy and nobility, referred to as the First and Second Estates. These groups, comprising of a small elite group of people, collected taxes from the general population but did not pay taxes themselves. They led extravagant lifestyles and mismanaged the country with great skill. As a result of this financial imbalance and poor governance, economic conditions worsened for the common people, leading to widespread inability to afford basic necessities like food. This mounting frustration with hardship among the general populace eventually led to the downfall of the Ancien regime and the end of the absolute monarchy in France. In this video, we will explore some interesting aspects of life in France before the Revolution, starting with the topic of capital punishment. During the French Revolution, there was a significant reform in the methods of capital punishment, leading to the widespread adoption of the guillotine. The guillotine was seen as a more humane and egalitarian method of execution, replacing the various and often brutal methods used previously. Additionally, there was a movement towards abolishing the death penalty, and people like Maximilien Robespierre initially supported this ban. However, as the revolution progressed, Robespierre's stance shifted dramatically. He later became one of the guillotine's biggest fans, particularly during the Reign of Terror, when it was employed extensively against perceived enemies of the revolution. Capital punishment in pre-revolutionary France consisted of multiple methods of execution for different crimes and even for different classes of people. These executions were more than just methods of administering justice. They were social events that attracted large crowds and served multiple functions in society. People from various social classes would gather to watch, and the atmosphere could be akin to that of a public festival or fair today. The presence of vendors selling souvenirs and refreshments contributed to this atmosphere. While it is accurate to say that many were drawn to these events, the range of emotions in the crowd were diverse. Some were excited or entertained, others were curious or morbidly fascinated, and still others might have been there to mourn a loved one, being repelled or horrified. Hanging was the standard method of execution for common people. It was used for various crimes, from theft to robbery to more serious offences like murder. Beheading was generally reserved for the nobility and was considered a more dignified and less painful method of execution compared to the alternative methods available at the time. The difference in execution methods between the nobility and the commoners reflected the deep class divisions in society. Even in death, the nobility retained certain privileges that set them apart from the lower classes. For a member of the nobility to be sentenced to death, typically the crime had to be very severe. High treason, murder, or crimes against other members of the nobility could result in the death sentence. Sometimes the execution of nobles had political motivations, rivalries, power struggles, or the need to make an example of a particular individual could lead to some extreme sentences. Beheading was usually carried out by an axe or a sword. The executioner's skill was crucial. A skilled executioner could decapitate a person with a single blow, which was considered a quick and merciful death. Despite the visibility of such executions, they were relatively rare compared to the execution of commoners. The nobility had more resources to defend themselves legally and were often protected by their status. Burning was also a form of execution used for certain crimes, including arson, which makes sense, I suppose. Burning was also commonly used for those convicted of witchcraft or heresy. It seems highly likely that many executed individuals were in fact innocent of the crime of witchcraft. That's just my opinion. Homosexuality did sometimes lead to death by burning, but it was typical not to proclaim this so-called crime to the crowd during executions. It was a family show after all. improper relations with animals could also result in defendants getting a little toasty. One such case was that of Jacques Ferron, who was accused of having improper conduct with a female donkey. You will be glad to hear that the donkey was acquitted and not put to death, as she did not consent to the rendezvous. Not sure how they determined this, but as long as justice was done in the end, eh? The breaking wheel was another method of execution used in pre-revolutionary France, primarily for crimes such as banditry and murder. This particularly brutal form of capital punishment was reserved for those considered to have committed especially heinous offences. Boiling was also a form of capital punishment used for counterfeiters. This severe punishment was likely because counterfeiting was considered a serious crime, often equated with treason. Since counterfeit coins often bore the king's image, producing them was seen as an affront to the monarchy itself, thus warranting such a harsh penalty. The last capital punishment was dismemberment, which was one of the most severe forms of capital punishment in pre-revolutionary France, reserved for the gravest of crimes such as high treason, parricide, or regicide, killing of a monarch. This form of execution was seen as a fittingly harsh penalty for what was considered the utmost betrayal against the state, family, or royal authority. Next we have the potato prohibition. When the potatoes were first introduced to Europe from the Americas, they were met with suspicion. In France, this suspicion was so strong that potatoes were believed to cause diseases like leprosy and were viewed as unfit for human consumption. As a result of these fears, the cultivation and consumption of potatoes was banned in France. This ban was not uniformly enforced across the country, but was indicative of the general mistrust in the mighty spud. Antoine Augustin Parmentier, a pharmacist and agronomist, recognised the potential of the potato as a food source. After being captured during the 7 Years' War and fed potatoes by the Prussians, he returned to France determined to change public opinion about this crop. Parmentier conducted various experiments to demonstrate the nutritional value of potatoes. He also prepared a feast for high-profile guests, including Benjamin Franklin and Antoine Lavoisier, where dishes were made almost exclusively from potatoes. Parmentier employed clever strategies to popularise potatoes. For instance, he planted a field of potatoes and placed armed guards around it to suggest high value, but intentionally allowed the guards to accept bribes and turned a blind eye to peasants stealing the potatoes, thereby increasing interest and distribution. Thanks to Parmentier's relentless effort, the ban on potatoes was lifted in late 18th century. His work played a key role in overcoming the stigma associated with potatoes. Potatoes eventually became an integral part of French cuisine. Dishes like hacus parmentier, a dish similar to shepherd's pie, were named in his honour, celebrating his contribution to French gastronomy. The adoption of the potato as a staple crop also had significant implications for food security. Potatoes could be grown in poor soil conditions and yielded a high calorific content, which helped alleviate famine and food shortages in the years to come, including during the French Revolution and its aftermath. For our third strange fact, we will stay with matters of a culinary nature. The culinary habits of the French nobility in the period leading up to the French Revolution were characterised by an extraordinary level of extravagance and sophistication. Meals were not just about sustenance, but were elaborate displays of wealth, power and status. This lavishness was reflected in the multiple courses and the inclusion of exotic and unusual delicacies. A typical meal for the nobility could consist of numerous courses, sometimes more than 10. Each course would feature a variety of dishes, allowing chefs to showcase their skill and creativity. The presentation of food was as crucial as the taste. Dishes were often elaborately garnished and decorated, turning the meal into a visual spectacle. The dining table itself would be a scene of opulence, with fine silverware, elaborate centerpieces and ornate dinnerware. Peacock and swan birds were considered luxury foods and were prized not just for their taste but also for their appearance. Peacocks, for instance, would sometimes be served with their tail feathers reattached, making them a centerpiece of the meal. The nobility also indulged in various types of game like boar, venison and pheasant. Seafoods, including sturgeon, oyster and even sea turtles, was another category of luxury food. The aristocracy's taste for exotic food also included ingredients and dishes from foreign lands, spices from Asia and Africa, fruits from the Americas, and recipes from other European countries were all sought after. These meals were a way for the nobility to display their wealth and power. The ability to afford and serve rare and expensive foods was a clear indicator of one's social status. Beyond just dining, these meals were social events where the elite would gather to network, display their status and entertain guests. They were an integral part of the social fabric of the nobility. The extravagance of the nobility's diet stood in stark contrast to the diet of the common people, who mostly ate simple foods like bread, soups and stews. This disparity in diets was a clear reflection of the vast social and economic gap between the classes. The last aspect of life in France before the Revolution we are going to discuss is clothing. Fashion was another area where social divisions were evident. Sumptuary law restricted certain styles and fabrics to the nobility, reinforcing social distinctions. The concept of fashion police in pre-revolutionary France was a literal one, related to the enforcement of sumptuary laws. These laws were an important aspect of maintaining the strict social hierarchy and order of the time, and they had significant implications for how individuals in different classes could dress and present themselves. Sumptuary laws were regulations that limited the types and quality of clothing, jewellery, and other personal adornments based on social rank and class. Their primary purpose was to ensure that the visual distinction between the classes was clear and maintained, preventing commoners from imitating the appearance of the nobility. These laws often specified the materials, colours and styles that individuals of different classes could wear. For example, luxurious fabrics like silk and velvet, as well as certain colours, might be reserved exclusively for the nobility. The fashion police were officials tasked with enforcing these sumptuary laws. They would monitor public attire and ensure compliance with the regulations. Those found in violation of sumptuary laws could face various penalties, including fines, confiscation of the prohibited items, and sometimes public humiliation. The enforcement of the sumptuary laws was a reflection of the rigid social structure of the time. Clothing was not just a matter of personal taste, but a symbol of one's place in the social hierarchy. By controlling how people dressed, the monarchy and the ruling class exerted their power and reinforced the social order. It was a way to visually demarcate the boundaries between the classes. Despite these regulations, there were instances of resistance and evasion. People found ways to bend or circumvent the rules, and fashion often became a subtle means of expressing dissent or challenging social norms. I hope you enjoyed our look at French society and life before the Revolution. Please tune in next time for more historical tidbits.